Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for joining us for the Preparing for Successful Hill meetings. I'm Shannon Von Belden, the RDLA Program Director. Many of you have attended our training webinars over the last few weeks and have been preparing for your virtual meetings next week. We all want to put our best foot forward when we meet with our senators and representatives. So this session will give you tips for your meetings from a seasoned professional, Sarah Lloyd Stevenson, Director of Bay Grade Drinker Consulting. We hope to have time for questions at the end, so please feel free to put any questions in the chat or Q&A box, and we will take a look at them at the end of our presentations. I'm joined today by Sarah Lloyd Stevenson. She is Director of Bay Grade Drinker Consulting. She has worked on rare disease policy for more than 10 years and serves as policy consultant to the Every Life Foundation for Rare Diseases. She's a former policy advisor to federal government agencies and elected officials and helps health and life sciences stakeholders advance policy goals before Congress and federal agencies. She worked to draft, enact, and gain support for health laws and policies, and delivers policy advocacy strategies informed by firsthand experience. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah Lloyd. Your experience will certainly be useful for advocates before they meet with their senators and representatives virtually next week.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank you to all of you for having me here today. Tell me if you can't hear me well. I'm doing my computer audio, which is not typically my audio connection. So if there's a problem, I can dial in if there is one. Yeah, so thank you for that introduction. Really appreciate it. I will add, so as Shannon noted, I've worked in this space for about 12 years total now. Worked on Capitol Hill as well as within the administration. So, you know, this is not gospel that I'm sharing today, and every meeting that you have on Capitol Hill will be a little different. But just so you know kind of who is this person, why is she telling us this? These are the things that I've thought of over the years as being effective tools to use and think about during Hill meetings from both the perspective of being a Hill staffer and now being someone who talks to Hill staffers on a daily basis. So that's why, so if you want to listen to me and take this as guidance moving forward, that's what has informed these points that we're going to talk about today. So first and foremost, you guys have a big job ahead of you next Tuesday and Wednesday. I, for one, am really excited to hear about how some of these conversations go. I know you've already started hearing a little bit about some of the bills that you'll be talking about and the policy asks, and there are going to be some other great panels, at least one of which I will be honored to join later this week, I guess tomorrow, to talk about the Benefit Act. So I'm not going to go into the policies. Always happy to answer questions one-off on those if you have any. But today, this is really what's a Hill meeting going to be like, especially in this virtual environment. I think a lot of the pointers remain the same as far as be deferential to the staff, be clear with your requests, be open about your story, and always follow up. Those are some very simple key points that you need to keep in mind, or I recommend you're keeping in mind, regardless of the format of your meeting. That being said, virtual meetings are a little different. So do note that, for example, if you were in the Hill office buildings, and you were going into the Dirksen building to see my former boss, Senator Wicker, or his staff, you know, you have a few minutes to chit chat, and what I say, act human, learn a little bit about the person. And unfortunately, we've lost that some in the virtual environment. So I do just note how these meetings can be a little different virtually. That being said, if there's an opportunity to get to know the staffer, feel free to do it. They want to know you. You are their constituent. And that's why your story as an advocate is, I think, the most important thing for you to bring to these conversations. So with that little disclaimer and table setting, I'll dive into the slides here. So this first slide, not surprisingly, is about logistics. I have a few pointers here. Again, none of this is gospel, none of this is you have to do it, but these are just some things to keep in mind before the meeting. So first and foremost, it is helpful to research the office, especially if you're going to be asking for support of a specific bill, as you guys will be next week. You want to take a look and see, has this office already co-sponsored this bill? Because you don't want to be caught flat-footed and say, Shannon, I really want your boss to support the STAT Act. And then the staffer to say, well, actually, he already has. Very simple way to do that is congress.gov. I believe on EveryLife and RDLA websites, you can find all the bill numbers and all the information for the bills to easily check that. Further on research, get an idea of what committee the members of Congress are on. If they're on the Health Committee in the Senate or the Energy and Commerce Committee, for example, in the House, that means that's a really good member for us to be thinking about asking for certain bills because they have jurisdiction over many of our policy priorities. I also say, and this sounds a little creepy, but if you have the time and you know the name of the staffer, give them a quick Google too. For all you know, they may have gone to your alma mater, and what a great connection to make with that staffer. I promise they're not going to think you're weird. If you say, hey, by the way, I saw that you went to this small liberal arts school in Mississippi, and so did I, they'll probably find it pretty endearing. Now, someone could disagree with me on that. When that's been the case for me, it's always gone over pretty well. But again, what you want to do through this is help make that personal connection with the staff, share your story, let them remember you, as well as the policies you're asking about. So just join a few minutes early, point that in the audio and video connection. These are obviously things that are helpful for today's virtual environment. You are going to be pretty limited on time. Best case scenario, you get half an hour with the staff. They're running between meetings, so it is possible that they say, sorry, I'm meeting with my boss, just got added to my calendar. I'm gonna have to jump at the 10-minute mark or the 15-minute mark. So you definitely don't want technology to slow you down. You don't want your audio to be a problem and not be able to be heard. So if you're able, start the Zoom link a little early and figure out before you get the meeting started, who in your team, who in your meeting is going to say what, especially if you have a couple different requests. And I've seen you guys do this really well before in action, that if someone's going to talk about Stat Act, assign that. Okay, Shannon, you're going to talk about Stat Act for 5 minutes. I'll talk about benefit, and then we'll wrap up with talking about the Rate of Use Caucus. So have that plan so that when you go into the meeting, again, this isn't rocket science, but just reiterating, so if you go into the meeting, you're prepared and have a plan. So notice go ahead.
Do you mind if I, some people are having trouble hearing you.
Oh.
Is it possible for you to call in?
Can you hear me better when it's like this?
I think that's worse, actually.
Hold on, guys. Shannon, do you want to talk for a minute and just
let me go ahead and skip ahead. And I was going to follow Sarah Lloyd up with just logistics about your Hill meeting. So let me go ahead and get that over with while Sarah Lloyd deals with her technical difficulties. So for those of us joining our virtual Hill meetings next week, they are on Tuesday and Wednesday. You should have already received your schedule of meetings. If you received that email on Monday, July 12th, click on that email from Advocacy Associates and click on the link in the body of the email. That will take you directly to your schedule. If you did not receive that email, please email myself or Caitlin, and we will make sure it gets resent to you. Your meetings will be listed in the Eastern time zone, so please adjust the times to where you're located, and you will receive updates to your schedule if any of your meetings are changed. Also, you might notice at the bottom of your schedule, some of the meetings might be still listed as TBD. We are still waiting for a handful of meetings to be confirmed and scheduled, so treat those meetings as if they're scheduled, plan for them, plan to attend those meetings when they do get scheduled, because they will get scheduled. So this is what your schedule on the platform looks like for your virtual Hill meetings. Please check this as soon as possible if you haven't already. The scheduling platform, you can find all of your meetings listed, the dates and times of your meetings. When you click on the meeting, it will take you to a screen like this. So from this page is where you will join your online meetings. You'll see that green button down towards the bottom that says you have checked in. Click on that check-in button. That is what is going to get you points for the scavenger hunt. So you will receive an email for checking that button. And then you can also find the names and addresses of the other advocates that are joining you for your meetings right here at the bottom where it says attendees. If you haven't already, send an email to everyone that's joining you on a meeting and you can get coordinated deciding who's going to make what ask during your meetings like Sarah Lloyd suggested. And then finally, you can find out who you're going to meet with on this page right here in that upper box that says Rep. Greg Pence meeting with, this says the staffer and the member itself. So that is where you'll see if you're meeting with a staffer or you're also meeting with the member. And then preparation is key, and we try to give you as much information as possible to prepare as much as possible. So you can find and review your one-pagers on the RDLA suggested asks, practice making your ask or your elevator pitch, coordinate with your teams if your meetings include others, and of course, check that Hill meeting schedule. And then on the platform, there are a number of things to help you prepare. Check out the resource library on the Rare Disease Week platform. You'll be able to find the one-pagers themselves. You can find video on the legislative asks, a video on a mock meeting. So what that actually looks like, it's over Zoom, legislative scorecards, videos of the training webinars, and more. And I'm going to go back to Sarah Lloyd's slides because I presume that she has figured out her issue. There you go. I'm going to hand it back to you, Sarah Lloyd.
Excellent. Can you guys hear me now? Okay. All right. I'm so sorry. So what I just did, avoid that at all costs. Make sure that you use the, okay, thank you, Lindsay. Good. That you're using the audio that is dependable and works well for you. Don't try to mix things up right before your meeting. So yeah, the quick things on logistics, actually, that was really helpful to be able to see some of the behind the scenes stuff from Shannon of what kind of information y'all will get before the meeting. So to that end, you'll know the name of the staffer. Again, don't be creepy, Google them if you want, but know a little bit about the member too. If you're able, for example, if they've joined the Rare Disease Caucus previously, or if they've worked in some FDA policy, you can say, hey, I know you've worked in this space before, you've been a leader here, and make that connection. You may not have time to do all of that either before the meeting or during, but it is just an option should you think there's allowable time. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about really the quick pointers that if you take nothing away from today, these are some things I think will be really helpful to arm you ahead of these meetings. First and foremost, and this sounds kind of maybe counterintuitive when we're talking about policy, and obviously everyone on Capitol Hill is by nature a political beast. But as you can, check your politics at the door. I am sure you've heard this before. We are very fortunate as a community that the issues for which we'll be advocating are bipartisan. That means Republicans like them, Democrats like them. Some people may not like them for some reason or the other. I see no reason not to like the priorities that we're advocating for next week. But just because someone is from an opposite political party as you may be, it does not mean that you can't work with them and that they won't support this issue. So I say that to note that perhaps you'll say, oh, so-and-so is a Republican and he doesn't support a lot of federal research, or he doesn't really work much in this space, and I just can't imagine he's going to support you or support my policy. You'll be surprised. You can be surprised by how members that you would expect not to want to support these types of things may get on board, or at least be very receptive to your point. That being said, the second one here, and again, I've kind of made these a little kitschy sounding, but never underestimate the power of a 23-year-old staffer. This was something when I was a 23-year-old staffer, I was always surprised when a constituent, an advocate, of course, never from the rare disease community, would come in and talk to me and say, you know, oh, honey, get me coffee, or, oh, well, who are you? When I want to talk to the senator. The point here, and I think most of us know, is that the people who make the decision in these offices are those young staff. They're young because the pay is bad and the hours are bad. So it really takes young people to get the work done. But think of that staff person with whom you're speaking as the gatekeeper to the boss. So that member of Congress, your senator, is not going to hear about your story or your issue unless you've convinced that, I say 23-year-old, they could be any age, of course, unless you've convinced that staff person. So just keep that in mind as you're talking to them. This sounds a little, I don't know, pandering perhaps, but I also think it's very much appreciated by staff when you are really appreciative of their time. As I mentioned a moment ago, they are running from meeting to meeting. They're handling, especially in the House, they are handling probably not just health policy, but maybe labor, education, tax, any number of things. So when you say, hey, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to meet with me, I think that really resonates well with staff, and they'll appreciate that appreciation. Shannon already said, have your elevator pitch ready. Know what your story is, because they want to hear that personal connection. At the end of the day, you may have lost them on some of the policy stuff about a bill, but if they can remember from your conversation, Shannon, so I keep using you as an example, Shannon. Shannon is my constituent. She told me this heartbreaking story about her diagnostic journey or the issues she's having because her disease doesn't have a treatment approved by the FDA. And then they can remember the name of the bill. You've done a good job. That is, you reached them, you got them. They will be empathetic. I can still tell you some of the toughest disease advocates who came into my office back in the day who brought me to tears because they shared our story, their story. So have that succinct and ready. And I will say, don't let it take up the entire time, but make sure you're making that personal connection, because that's what they care about. You then obviously connect it to the policy. And this success definition, this ties back a little bit to, even if the member isn't going to support the bill at the end of the day, or if you're not expecting them to support the bill, don't think that your meeting is not a success. Success comes in many ways. Obviously, this year we have 4 legislative asks, I think, that will be presented to members of Congress, and you can prioritize which ones you want to talk about. But even if that member of Congress doesn't then the next day go and co-sponsor that bill, that does not mean that your meeting was a failure. It takes a lot for a member, especially certain members, to sign their name to a piece of legislation. You have done a great job, in my opinion, and again, this is the opinion of a staff person and someone who lobbies every day. You've done a great job if you shared your story, they listened to your story, you raised awareness for rare diseases broadly, and you made them aware of your legislative ask. Because even if they don't sign on to that bill, there could be an opportunity for when that bill is going through committee and they have to make the decision, do we vote up or down, they may say, oh wait, we heard from someone about this, it's not a top priority for us, but sure, we'll support it because our constituents told us to. Or if they think of another idea down the road that may be related to rare disease, they'll say, hey, that constituent Shannon came in, let's give her a call, maybe we can work with them again. There are any number of things that can come out of a meeting and may not be an immediate co-sponsorship. So I say that hopefully to help empower you to know that your voice really, really matters, and that just because you may not get a co-sponsorship doesn't mean that the meeting was not a success. To that end, the best way to ensure any type of success from a meeting is follow-up. You will be shocked with the number of people who come to Capitol Hill, share a story, ask a lot of the staff, say co-sponsor this bill, support this issue, and then the staff don't hear from them again for another year when that advocacy day comes back up. Now, obviously, you all have got other things going on. It is easy to forget a follow-up. I cannot underestimate, or you cannot underestimate the value of that follow-up, because again, think about that staffer, think about what they're doing that day. They are going from meeting to meeting, issue to issue. They're going to hear your story. They will hopefully be empathetic to your story. They will think about the bill, and they will put that one pager on their desk, file it away in an email, and we'll move on to the next meeting. They may not think about it again until they hear from you. So if you were able, always ask for their contact information. It should be, I think, in the portal that Shannon was just showing you, but always follow up. A week later is generally a good time. Say, hey, we really appreciated your time last week. Just as a reminder, here are the bills that we're supporting. Would love to see Congressman Stevenson, whoever, sign on to this legislation. If you have any questions, let us know. Offer the RDLA team, the EveryLife team, as resources for them if they have more specific questions. That follow-up is, I just can't score how important that is, because the meeting is important, but it's only as good as your follow-up will be. All right, why don't we go into the next slide, and Shannon, feel free to interrupt me if we've got any questions or comments through on. I am not going to read all of these to you because it's a lot of words on one slide, but we'll be sharing the slides afterwards, I believe. So this is just something that could be helpful for you to think about before you go into those meetings. This is the type of question we typically hear from Hill staff when they are thinking, oh, you're providing me with a bill that my boss should co-sponsor. This is the kind of stuff they're going to say, well, tell me more about the bill beyond just the 1 or 2 line pitch, the elevator pitch that you provide. This ranges from what's the cost, the CBO score of the bill, who's sponsoring it, is it bipartisan, who opposes it, a lot of different things. So again, I won't read to you, but this might be a helpful cheat sheet. So that's for you to think about before the meetings. That being said, do not feel like you have to have the answer to everything. That's actually an excellent opportunity to follow up. That if the staff say, who's this or who's that, or this question or that question, you can actually say, you know what, I'll get back to you on that. And then a week later, when you do that follow-up email, you can say, here's the answer to your question. Thank you for having that thoughtful question. So those are just, again, won't read them to you, but there are some quick questions you can likely expect from some combination of Hill staff, should they be engaged in the meeting. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the, I think I've reiterated this enough probably. All of the reasons why follow-up is so important. I think I just mentioned what I said previously about how a question can help actually. Again, emphasizing being appreciative, all of this. But I think we can go on to the next one so that we can get on to questions in a minute here with a few minutes to spare. I think I have one more slide. Is that right, Shannon? Excellent. Okay, so similarly, I tried to make these pretty short, but per usual, more words than you likely need. Before your meeting, this might be helpful to take a look at the checklist just to say, okay, what did that Sarah Lloyd girl tell us to do? Log on a little early, let them know everyone. Oh, it's a great point. Yes, have a pre-meeting with your team if you can. Let them know everyone who's on the screen. I do that sometimes where I kind of forget. There'll be 3 of us and they'll say, I'm like, hi, I'm Sarah Lloyd. And I just go into my pitch and I realize, I have no idea who my coworker Shannon is here. And I didn't even give her an opportunity to introduce herself. It's helpful just for the staff to just transparency purposes, but also for the staff to know who they're talking to and to know who these constituents are, what their issues are. You want everyone to have that opportunity. All those introduction points kind of go together. Make a specific ask. We've talked about this. Refer to materials. So RDLA has a lot of great materials for you guys to use on the different bills. That again is an excellent follow-up opportunity, whether you sent the materials ahead of time or you want to send them afterwards or send them afterwards for a second time because they may not have read them the first time. That's a great opportunity to follow up. One note too is about questions from staff. So we had the list of potential questions they'll ask. Do try, if you're able, to send a couple of, leave a couple of minutes at the end so that they can provide those questions. Don't just do a monologue like I'm doing to you right now. Try to make it a dialogue as much as possible. This is a nitpicky thing. Try to avoid the question, what do you know about rare disease? Or what do you know about my disease? Or what do you know about the Benefit Act? That typically puts the staff a little bit on the spot, and that can be a little awkward for them. People on the Hill have a lot going on. They also don't like to admit that they don't know things. So they may try to come up with an answer and it doesn't usually go well. So I would recommend, hey, I know you're familiar with Fragile X, but I'm gonna give you just a quick 1-sentence, 2-sentence reminder of this and my story and how this relates to the policy we're going to talk about today. And I know that staff really appreciate that. So again, mindful of all of these things, you can read all of this. I just saw a note, maybe someone's answered or question. The helpful to a handwritten note or an email, and that's an excellent question. I'm from the South where we are big fans of handwritten notes. That being said, there are a few limiting factors there. Handwritten notes traditionally take a very long time to get to staff because they have to go through a screening process, number one. Number two, a lot of staff aren't in the office right now, so they may never get that handwritten note. So I think it's lovely if you're able to do a handwritten note, but do not do it in lieu of an email. You should do it in addition to an email. An email is definitely the best way to get the staff that follow-up. I'm going to be answering a couple of these questions, Shannon, as I see them, but
that's great. Yeah.
Typically meetings are 30 minutes. They can be shortened to 15 again because staff may be changing their plans and everything. But 30 minutes is what hopefully you'll be allotted.
There's a question too, Sarah Lloyd, about follow-up. How frequently should they be following up? Especially if they want to continue to contact and follow up on a regular basis.
That is an excellent question because it is a very delicate balance. And I will be honest. I think do the first follow-up within a week and then within another 2 weeks and another 2 weeks or so. You do not want to be that person who is emailing staff every day or even every week for a year. But Similarly, emails get pushed down their inbox. So you want to be at the top as much as you can. Just be respectful and think, what would you want, right? If someone's asking something of you that may not be a simple request, just don't overdo it would be my thing there. I think within a week and then within a couple additional weeks. And then if you don't hear them, if you have the ability to do this, within a couple months, if you hadn't heard anything, shoot them a note and say, just want to say again, thank you for your time. I think that's a helpful thing to again help that relationship continue. And then before you know it, you'll be back again for Rare Disease Week or Rare Across America. And I do admit, I appreciate the comment from the Yankee about how y'all like thank you notes too. Glad to hear. I married a boy from Philadelphia, so he's a big fan of it.
And then someone asked about sending information ahead of time. I would say that we do, advocacy associates who schedules the meetings, they do send ahead the one-pagers that RDLA prepares on the legislative ask, so that they do have them ahead of time, because members like to know what you're coming in to talk about. They don't like being surprised. But for folks who maybe aren't making one of the suggested legislative asks and are doing a different ask, how should they phrase sending that information ahead of time to the staffer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do want to say, just because you send the info ahead of time doesn't prohibit your sending it afterwards too, again, in that all-important follow-up. If you have something that hasn't been sent, and again, you should have the contact information for the staffer. I think I'm answering the question here, but just shoot them a note a day or so ahead, so probably tomorrow or Monday, and say, hi, my name is Sarah Lloyd. I'm from your district. I'm going to talk to you on Tuesday. Really looking forward to it. Wanted to provide a few points for you as resources before our conversation. Staff do appreciate that a lot, because to Shannon's point, they like to know what you're going to talk about. They may not have had an opportunity. That being said, they want that information. They appreciate it. That is when we talk about one-pagers are great because they're one page, easy to consume. That being said, they may not have had time to read it. So don't be surprised or disappointed if staff says, okay, what do you want to talk about? And you think, I just emailed you these one-pagers 2 days ago. Why haven't you read it? Again, that's the always remember how busy they are, which sounds very deferential. We're all busy. But know that they may not have had a chance to read it. Some staff are really amazing, and they just come up with time and they do this and they read all the one-pagers, and I think it's remarkable. But they may not have all had that opportunity. So I say, though, send it off to them. Say, we're looking forward to meeting with you. Thank you. Here's this in advance.
Wonderful. Amy had a question about the time constraints and how in-depth or detailed her rare disease story should be. And so we always suggest that 60-second elevator pitch. Try and get the major talking points in, what you really want to share, those points that are really going to make the most impact. And then she asks, should the rare disease story be separate from the ask or tied together? And I think the most effective way to do it is to connect the two, and for where your story to relate to what your ask is going to be, so that it directly impacts and would benefit you if the senator or representative actually does co-sponsor or support the bill you're asking them to. What do you think, Sarah Lloyd?
I completely agree on all of those points. Elevator pitch, and then connect it as much as you can. It may not seem natural to do it. For example, when you're talking about the STAT Act, there are a lot of pieces to that even. So you might want to pick one piece there, right? So maybe you do have an approved therapy for your disease, but the payment access piece is a problem. So the idea for the early payer program in the STAT Act to help that coordination earlier could have been something that helped you. There's always a way to connect it. It just might take a little thinking, but definitely try to. And I'm thinking through all of our legislative asks. I think most of them you can make that connection, but that helps because your story is very important, but you want to bridge that to say, okay, here's the problem, my story, here's the solution, my bill.
Excellent. And then we have a question about pre-meeting with the other attendees in your meetings to make sure to plan out your time and your ask, that there may not be time for everyone to speak at length during a meeting. Do you want to address some of those issues? Yeah,
if you were able to huddle with your team ahead of time, it's very helpful. You can even do a dry run. Get your mom on the phone, your kid, and say, hey, you're going to be our member of Congress today, and advocate, lobby them. So I think it's very helpful. It is not always possible, and that is okay. You can also just coordinate. Again, I'm saying try to have a pre-meeting. But if you can't do that, you can coordinate over email, assign roles, essentially. Somebody's going to kick off the meeting. Someone's going to and introduce RDLA and Rare Disease Week and what we're doing. And then you're going to go through your stories, and each of you should have either sharing or have individual legislative asks, depending on which bills you're talking about. So try to have all of that squared away as best you can ahead of time.
Great advice. So we expect all meetings to be really positive and wonderful on the Hill. There are a few rare instances. I know I've talked to advocates before where a meeting, like maybe the staffer isn't really all that interested or doesn't seem very interested, or there might be some negative aspect to it. How do you think advocates should handle these difficult meetings?
With grace, as much as you can. It's disappointing. It happens, and it especially happens more during the virtual environment. I hate to say, but just to be realistic, because these are young usually staff who have a lot going on. So for example, I would be surprised if many of your meetings, the staff decide not to be on camera. And that's okay. A lot of them do that. To that end, I think if the staff does go on camera with you, say, hey, by the way, thanks for being on camera. We know you don't have to do that. And when they're off camera, my experience has been they tend to multitask. They tend to tune out a little bit and be working on different things. So a way to help with that, what I think is potentially a negative type of meeting, is, again, try not to do too much of a monologue and stop to provide time for questions, stop to ask if they have questions, stop and say, try to engage them as much as possible. This goes back to my act like a human point, that if you're engaging with the person, it makes them a lot harder to just tune you out, and it will make it more of a conversation in which they're really listening to you. Hopefully no one encounters that. The other negative thing, of course, that can happen is a staffer says, well, we're just not going to support this. Or they may have legitimate policy reasons for not supporting, which, by the way, y'all are going to think I'm crazy, but that can be a successful meeting, because our hearing from, especially from the Every Life perspective, if we're hearing that, wait, there's some concerns about the bill out there we didn't know about, that can be very informative to us to figure out a path forward. So again, even negative meetings can be a success if you identify some concerns or issues with our requests.
I've also seen advocates asked to take a picture with the staffer who has turned off their video, and they're usually more than happy to get off video to take the picture. So
that's awesome.
You want to bump that up to the beginning of your meeting instead of the end of the meeting, because that would be hard for them to turn off their camera after they've already turned it on.
That's a great point. And typically staff are good about wanting to being okay taking a picture. I used to love that. This is so silly of me. I used to love it when advocates wanted that. I'm like, oh, you want to get my picture? I thought it was so nice. That was, of course, in person, which is a little different. But that's a great point.
Yeah, it was sweet when I was.
I love that
too.
That's
they were
smart.
so excited to be on the Hill. What is one thing you recommend advocates not do in their meetings? Is there anything in particular?
I know I mentioned a couple about politics. Try to stay out of things. So, for example, if it's an office who supports Medicare for all or doesn't support Medicare for all, and you do, or one of those more politically contentious things, just try to avoid that as much as possible. I would just say not as much as possible. Just avoid it. Don't talk about things with which you disagree. Come to the meeting as if you are assuming you can be on common ground, and by sharing your story, sharing where you're from, that should help identify that and create that solid common ground. Other things, just be positive. One tough thing as well, I know I mentioned, don't necessarily say to them, hey, what do you know about this? Because that kind of puts them on the spot. Another thing not to be surprised about, and I hear this a lot, advocates will say, okay, do you think your boss will support this? They're not going to give you an answer right then. You can ask that. Or say, you may want to ask it, and I would rephrase that to, are there any specific things about this bill that you think your boss would support or wouldn't support? because they're going to say, well, I don't know if he's going to support it. I have to talk to him about it. Staff are very guarded about that because they know if they say their boss will support something and it's a problem. I also saw a question similarly about what do you do for staff who always say no? And that's a tricky one. I think this is where the meeting can be a different kind of success, right? Of just continuing to share your story, continuing to build that relationship can be beneficial. That being said, everyone isn't going to be a champion. That's why we identify champions. We have members of Congress who have helped our community for years and will continue to. Everyone isn't going to do that. Just don't be discouraged is my biggest point for people who say no. Know that you've done your best, you've shared your story, you've done your follow-up, and you never know. I've seen members and staff change positions after years.
And we're hoping that these meetings will be the beginning of long-standing relationships where advocates can continue to build the relationships with these staffers or the members themselves. What are your biggest tips to building that relationship?
I bet y'all can guess. Follow up. Again, the idea, think of it, gosh, it's almost like speed dating or something, right? You want to have a conversation with them. You want to share a little bit about you. You want to hear a little bit about them. You want to make a request of them and have that dialogue, but you're not going to get a second date if you don't ask for it. So make sure you do that follow-up. And that's why I really like the question about how often or frequent should follow-up be, is do that follow-up within a week and then come back to them, even 6 months from now. And keep in mind too, and this probably goes without saying, we have some specific legislative asks next week for the context of Rare Disease Week. Maybe they support those, maybe they don't. But if you can form that relationship, you may have an issue 6 months from now. Heck, it may be that your passport is taking too long to get approved and you need the passport done quickly, and your congressman can help with that. There are benefits to having that relation with the congressional staffer, so that if you're having an issue, maybe there's an FDA issue that's happening, any number of things. It doesn't have to be just about this week's policy requests. Much as I would like it to be all focused on that, there are lots of benefits to keeping that relationship going as different policy concerns come up.
Is there anything going on the Hill right now, like recently or in the future, like that folks should be, keep in mind when they're in their meetings?
That is such a great question. Yes, you likely have heard a little bit about the infrastructure negotiations. So this is something actually I really like to talk to people about ahead of these types of meetings. I should have thought about myself, Shannon, because you kind of want to know what you're walking into, right? I've mentioned that these staff are going to be very busy, but you want to know the context of their environment. And right now on Capitol Hill, there's a lot going on, and it is a lot of partisan stuff, which is unfortunate. To that end, asterisk, silver lining, when we provide something that can be bipartisan and positive, that could be a nice thing for them to have a respite, essentially, from the politics of the day. But right now, there are negotiations going on between the White House, Democrat leadership, and a group of Republican lawmakers regarding infrastructure. Now, infrastructure, we traditionally think roads, bridges, but there is a larger part of that conversation about public health infrastructure, too. Similarly, that's one piece. It's a little outside of our space, but just note that public health infrastructure can be part of that. Those negotiations may fall through in large part because there's a separate initiative that is being pushed by Leader Schumer in the Senate, Chuck Schumer of New York, Democrat majority leader, to get a new partisan Democrat-led priority package, I will call it, through reconciliation process. I am not going to bore you with what reconciliation is, but I'm just going to tell you here so that if staff mention that and say, oh, reconciliation is an issue we're dealing with, you know what it is. It's a budgetary process through which the Senate can pass something that does not have to meet the filibuster, so does not have to have that 60 vote threshold. In today's context, that means that Democrats can pass something without any Republican votes. So that is in part fueling some debates on the Hill today, because Republicans obviously don't want that to happen and think things should be bipartisan. So that could come up in your meetings. Again, that's something that's going to be a major point of discussion over the next 2 to 3 months, if not longer. I will similarly note Cures 2.0. I know we've talked about this some in some of our community Congress meetings and some other contexts in Every Life in RDLA. But Representatives Upton and DeGette in the House on Energy and Commerce Committee, you all likely may remember the 21st Century Cures Act in 2016. They introduced and passed that bill into law back in 2016, which was a huge bipartisan achievement. It did some great things, including patient experience data during the FDA process, off of which Benefit Act is building. They have just introduced a discussion draft for Cures 2.0, which is a process they're hoping to move forward. So that is getting a lot of attention right now, specifically in the House of Representatives. The final thing I will mention is the PDUFA reauthorization process. The PDUFAs, of course, these are the user fees at FDA. It is something that goes through the legislative process every 4 years, and 2022 will mark the next UFA PDUFAs. I mention that because if you get a question about a vehicle for some of these bills, you may mention PDUFA, or staff may say, hey, are you thinking this will fit onto PDUFA? And you're going to say, what? What did they just say? That's what they're talking about. And the answer is yes. Stat Act benefit, both of those should be right for consideration as a policy writer in the PDUFA process that the Hill will be moving to next month, or next year, apologies. Sorry, that was a very long answer, but a lot's going on. But those are some of the high level things that are relevant to some of this.
That was great. And I should note too that Jamie Sullivan with the Everlight Foundation is going to talk about PDUFA during the Hot Topics and Rare Disease Policy tomorrow at 4 p.m. So if you're interested in learning more about PDUFA, that would be a great session for you to attend. Well, we've got time for maybe like one more question. I don't see anything new that we haven't touched on. There's one question that's kind of policy related that you probably know the answer to though, Sarah Lloyd, about telehealth services and if that's part of the STAT Act.
STAT Act does not touch on telehealth services, but there are a lot, and I'm always, I love talking about telehealth, so don't let me talk too long here. But there are a lot of great telehealth policies out there. I could point you to a few different ones. But if you mention telehealth and telehealth from the perspective of the patient, if this is something that you're interested in going forward, specifically from the flexibilities during the pandemic perspective, I guarantee staff will be interested in hearing. You cannot throw a rock in Congress and not hit someone who wants to talk about telehealth these days. So very, very popular, lots of bills on the Hill. The STAT Act does not get into telehealth because most of the telehealth policies currently under consideration deal with reimbursement, specifically reimbursement in Medicare, which of course helps dictate reimbursement policies across all other payers. I will note, I mentioned 21st Century Cures 2.0, and there was comprehensive telehealth reform included in that bill, as that was very comprehensive, looking at FDA, NIH research, as well as CMS coverage policies.
Awesome. Well, if anyone does have any pressing questions or needs, please reach out to myself or Caitlin Laws. And again, if you have not already, please check your schedules for your meetings next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. And if you are no longer able to attend your meetings, please reach out to myself or Caitlin Laws as well. We definitely don't want no-shows. We definitely do not want a senator or representative to get onto a meeting and not have an advocate attending. I think that is like a nightmare that I have recurring. So please let us know if you're not able to attend. We will make sure to let the office know. Don't reach out directly to the senator or representative's office because there might be others in your meeting. So just let us know. And our next session starts at 3 p.m. We're going to give you guys another little break before we get started again. And this is our deep policy dive on the Speeding Therapy Access Today Act. And we will be joined by Nicholas Minetto, principal at Big Ray Drinker Consulting, Jamie Sullivan with the Everlight Foundation, Paul Howard with Amicus Therapeutics, and Caitlin Van Sant with Congressman G.K. Butterfield. So to join the next session, please navigate back to the event platform, locate the events page, go to today's date and click on the session at 3 p.m. and click join now when you are ready to do so. Please go ahead and get yourself something to drink and shake your legs. Thank you so much for joining us today. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you need anything. And thank you.